Hello there, Gill. Welcome to the Slow OT podcast.
No, thank you for inviting me.
So shall we kick off with what attracted you to be an OT in the first place? And can you give a run through of your career history?
Yeah, that's fine. I became an OT in 2003. I'd was quite late to OT, a bit of a late starter. I was sort of approaching 40 when I started my training. So I think I'd sort of had children quite young and didn't really sort of think of a career until my children were getting older. And so I was working in a school, I think, thinking, my children are getting older. I really need to be doing something that's a bit more career-wise. And I worked as a teaching assistant for children with special needs. And we used to have a lot of OTs coming into the school. And so that's what gave me the idea. Plus the fact that I don't know whether it's still the case, but it was a bursary funded course, which was also another attraction. But I managed to get on, I think at the same time, I was just about to start training down in Kent when my husband's job moved to Norfolk. So rather than doing an in-service training course, I managed to get onto the full-time course at the UEA. And then when I qualified, I think it was the first year that the lecturers told us that it was going to be really difficult for us all to get a place on the rotation. So, that some of us might have to wait. And I panicked a bit at that because I'd got teenage children, I'd got debts from being, out of full-time work. So I just sort of started looking for jobs immediately. And I've got a job in social services. And I was there for the next 10 years, nearly 10 years. During that time, I think we all like to move on and do different things, but I found because I hadn't gone on the rotation, that really sort of held me back. And it was very difficult to get any NHS job because it always went to somebody coming through the rotation. So I did as much as I could in social services in terms of trying different jobs within Norfolk County Council. I did a stint in the sort of customer service department, sort of looking at the initial referrals and seeing how much an OT could do over the telephone, and lots of things like that. I even managed to arrange a job swap with an OT at the Coleman Hospital, and we did that for 6 months, which again was quite interesting. But I think finally enough was enough. I wanted to do something different, and I went to join a case management company to do something completely different. And I was there for about 4 years doing a sort of mixture of case management, a bit of moving and handling assessments, and a bit of sort of neuro OT. And then I got the opportunity, a job came up to work with a firm of solicitors. And that was my sort of dream job in a way, because when I left school, I weirdly started a law degree. I didn't finish it, but I felt like my world was coming full circle. And I'd never knew that this was an aspect of law because it was personal injury and medical negligence. And my role was to support people in the very early stages of claims. So there was no money from the claim at that stage, but it was just helping them navigate through, rehab and NHS and social services. And I did that with 2 different firms until last year when I joined Headway. So I've had quite a varied career to date.
Thank you. That's a really interesting history, and we'll definitely go back to the case management work and the litigation work later on. So you say you're currently working as an occupational therapist for Headway. So some people might not have heard of Headway. So who are they? What does the charity do?
Well, it's a brain injury charity. We're affiliated to Headway UK, which is the sort of main brain injury charity. That does a lot of campaigning and education training, fact sheets. We're more sort of on the ground, so we're affiliated to them, but we're actually an independent charity, and we support people, adults with a brain injury and their carers. We have, I think, 7 day centres at the moment in Yarmouth, Norwich, Kings Lynn, and places in between. We're doing outreach work as well with clients, and we've got lots of peer support groups, either in person or online, and carers groups as well. Lots of projects as well going on. So we're doing a brain injury champion project at the moment. So that's delivering training on brain injury to all sorts of different organisations.
Brilliant. What sort of organisations are you working with?
Well, we're hoping to be able to do some training with social workers, any organisations that are interested, really. So it might be big insurance companies, because people with brain injuries are everywhere.
Yeah.
So, the more we can get, a bit like the Carriers Champion project, just trying to get the word out there for anybody who's interested. And we're also doing work with probation as well, because again, a lot of people in prison have brain injury.
And this is around educating the staff about the effects of brain injuries.
Yeah.
And what other things do you do as in your role as an OT with Headway?
Well, it's quite an evolving role, because although there are 4 of us in total, we actually, because we're all part-time, we only equate to about just under 2 because obviously our therapy lead is doing more management stuff, and so our role at the moment is very much focused on assessing clients as they come in, so looking at the referrals that come in, doing that initial assessment, setting up the care plan, and then on top of that, it's advising and acting as a sort of consultant to the area managers and to support staff. We're also doing some sort of brain injury symptom management courses with clients. Outside talks. Last week I did a talk at the UEA for student social workers. So there's masses that we can do, but we are a very limited resource, so we have to sort of work out where is our role the most effective, really. And we've just got an interim CEO, and we're developing our new strategy. So again, our role may change depending on what the focus is in the next sort of strategy.
Thank you.
But it's evolving and it's dynamic, which is great.
Yeah, it sounds like a brilliant job. And for people listening that haven't worked with clients with brain injuries before, what are some of these symptoms that you're trying to work with them with the symptom management, but also educate other professions about?
Yeah, it's mostly the people that come to our centres tend to be around the hidden stuff. So I think most people understand the physical impairments that people get, but there may be the hidden stuff that people don't understand, like the problems that people might have with balance and pain and sensory issues, but also the cognitive. And that's a lot of our work is about the cognitive rehabilitation or reablement that we're doing. So we did a fatigue management course that went over 6 weeks, looking at all, and that includes all healthy lifestyle as well as the pacing, prioritizing, etc. And then we're just going to be starting a mood management course as well. But we'll be developing others as we go along. And we do a living with brain injury course as well, which is again over 6 weeks, looking at all the different aspects.
And with some of the other organisations you work with, like the probation services and the social workers, do you find that people are surprised when they hear about these hidden symptoms that people live with?
Yeah, even social workers, it's surprising how people don't appreciate those difficulties. They, put it down to, I think people as well who may be displaying anger, or sometimes just an exacerbation of existing traits. And that people have never really thought about it in terms of, that this is related to the brain injury and not just that's how they are. So yeah, it's quite illuminating.
Headway are a charity, so what's it like working for a charity compared to statutory services?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big change in the sense that it always surprises me how I often wonder how these charities survive, really, because they have to work on time limited funds. A lot of things, you may be given a grant to do a piece of work over 3 years, and then at the end of that 3 years, if you can't get funding, as we had recently, then staff end up losing their jobs, or groups have to end, and that's quite difficult to manage. I think that side of it, though, is the worrying side, the sort of lack of security around funding and around your job. But the good side is that you've got a lot more freedom to do the sort of things that really matter. You're not restricted to a very sort of tight remit. For example, in social services, we all know that OTs have all these skills, but all we could do at that time was equipment and adaptations, because that's why we were in, you know, that's the whole point of us being in social services. I think it is different now, and we do get involved in more, but yeah, the fact that we have much more autonomy and much more sort of power to define our own role, I think is what's quite exciting about working for charities.
And are you able to visit the clients at home as well as doing, you know, sort of things like group activity and outreach work?
Yeah, we do. We have been doing lots of home visits for the initial assessments. As with any sort of organisation, you try and you know, manage scarce resources. So if we can get people to come to the centre and we'll do the assessment there. But if we're doing outreach, we need to go and visit the home, so we'll do it there. But yeah, we do, and we get to take people places, you know, as part of our assessments as well. So it's, yeah, it can be a really, really interesting job.
And you must have learned a lot about the effects of brain injury from working as a case manager, which you did for a number of years. So for people that haven't heard of case managers, what do you do in that role?
Well, I'd never heard of it, strangely, when I went into case manager, and it was more of a social work type role initially, I thought. But as a case manager, it you're really assessing what people's rehabilitation needs are, and then putting in place things to sort of improve that rehabilitation. And the wonderful thing I liked about the case management role was you didn't have to rely on the statutory services. So, you know, if you'd identified that somebody needed physio, you know, a couple of times a week to work on certain things, you weren't relying on referring to the NHS. You could find a private one, and you could find the private one that was the best one in the business. And to do, you know, the goals might not be around the sort of stuff that statutory services would work on. So, you know, once people get to a certain point with their mobility, they're discharged. But if somebody then wanted to go on and do cycling, you know, we could do that. We could, you know, ask the solicitors for some money and get a physio and work on, or an OT, whoever was the best person. So yeah, lots of different things in case management. So you're looking at the rehab. I think I also got involved in managing support workers, recruiting, the whole package, recruiting support workers and then managing a team around that person. And then you can also get involved in some of the more mundane things like organising a new washing machine, or I think at one stage as well, I was helping a client organise a holiday to America. Yeah, so very varied.
Really important things. Even ordering a
Yeah.
washing machine might be mundane for you, but really, really important for the client.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so the
You
case,
don't realise how complicated they can be.
yes, and the case management companies are usually privately run. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't been around for a huge amount of time in this country. Probably when I started working, that was 2012. This company hadn't been going that long. And they're employed normally by solicitors or deputies. And they're employed as part of a sort of litigation case, really, to sort of help the solicitor assess what the needs are so that they can get the right level of compensation for that client. And in that you get the experts roles as well, but I was just really at the case management level.
So the money's all coming through insurance.
Yeah.
And what were some of the reasons for, so the clients you saw, what were some of the reasons that they had these large amounts of money from insurance coming through?
Mostly it was things like car accidents, people that have been involved in car accidents, or accidents at work. We had a young lady who'd fallen off a horse, somebody else who'd fallen from, I think somebody was in a warehouse and some things had fallen on top of him, and he'd fallen off a mezzanine floor, so he'd got head injury through that. And then there was sometimes the medical negligence cases as well. We used to get a whole range of things really related to that.
And if as a case manager you're helping to arrange things like care packages, support workers, I imagine you could work with the same client for years and years on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It would depend how long the case goes on. Sometimes it would take quite a few years for a case to settle, and it can be. And sometimes when cases settle, they continue to have a case manager. Not all of them. Some people decide once the case is settled that they'll manage it themselves. But yeah, it can go on for years, many years, especially the clinical negligence ones, because they tend to take a longer time to investigate and to settle. And if you're working with children as well, they can take much longer because sometimes they may want to sort of for a child to get to a certain age before they can really assess what the difficulties longer term will be. So yeah, you can be involved a very long time.
And it's a sort of generic profession, isn't it? That there's OTs go into case management, but like you mentioned, physios as well, social workers. What other professions go into case management?
It does tend to be predominantly OTs, which is great.
Okay.
But social workers, we had, I think at the company I worked, we had a lot of social workers. We had some physios, some speech and language therapists. And we did at one stage have a teacher. But I think the issue now, quite recently, there's been the Independent Register of Case Management, the IRCM.
Okay.
So they are now looking to regulate the profession because I think in the past anybody could set themselves up as a case manager, and you really had to make sure you were working for a good reputable company, you know, to make sure that you were getting a bona fide professional. But hopefully this new system will be a bit like HCPC, where they'll have to show evidence of their sort of competence to practice, which is great for the profession.
It is, but so you'd also have to register. You'd have to register not just as an OT, but as a case management manager as well.
Yeah, and there was ongoing debate, as some people were saying, that you could give up your OT HCPC because that you'd have to be committed to remaining as a case manager. And I think many OTs found that a bit, they wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to give up your registration as an OT.
Yeah, I can imagine it's very strong, isn't it? The OT identity. How was that for you, sort of going into a role that wasn't called an OT anymore?
I didn't find that too difficult, surprisingly, because I was surrounded by lots of OTs.
Yeah.
Whereas when I worked in social services, I was surrounded by social workers, so I didn't find it as difficult as I would have expected, really.
Thank you. And to be a case manager, what experience would people need to apply for that sort of job?
I think life experience is a big one, because you will be faced with so much, and so many varied circumstances. I think you have to be quite a robust person as well, because you're working with some people that have been through such horrendous situations and continue to, no matter what injuries they've had, just going through a litigation process is quite brutal. So, you have to be quite a resilient person, really good people management skills, especially when you're working with, managing therapy teams, managing support teams, a good understanding of the sort of different NHS social services pathways. So, having that general experience, community and acute, will really help.
And what drew you to that work after doing traditional OT roles in social services?
It was just sort of accidental, really. I think it was, as I'd said before, working in social services and struggling to get back into health. And in those days, there weren't many other jobs for OTs. So that seemed like the only, I think I knew a friend who'd gone to work for this company. So I thought, well, I'll try that. But there wasn't really any other opportunities.
And
But I
you've also
wished I'd known about it sooner.
and you
once
would have
I'd
got
once
into
I'd
it
read the
sooner, would
link.
you? Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you've also had job titles working in litigation as well. Is that different to case management, or are there overlaps?
It overlaps. I mean, it's very similar. I think I had two different titles with two different companies. So first, it was the client liaison, really make much sense. And then I was a client rehabilitation coordinator, I think. But it was literally like being a case manager, but with no money. So it was all about finding charities to support people and finding, helping them navigate the various routes, so helping them make a referral to social services, or advocating for them when they were having their sort of NHS assessments for continuing care and things like that. So yeah, it's very similar to a case manager.
And you
But I
mentioned
think
needing. Sorry, go
sorry,
on.
we just had additional roles in that we were sort of helping the solicitors, advising them on which case management companies to use. So we'd be meeting with case management companies to sort of work out which the best ones were, and just advising them on sort of clinical issues. So we'd sometimes get a solicitor who'd say to us, you know, we've got this client, and you know, we're thinking the insurance company's offered us a little bit of money, maybe for a bit of physio, and what do you think? And we'd have a look, and it may be that we'd be saying something like, well, we feel that you should go back and ask for more, because doing a bit of physio is probably not going to be that helpful, and it's a bit fragmented. And so maybe just giving them advice to go back and ask for more money for a much more coordinated, or a case manager, basically.
So it sounds like you need a lot of confidence in those roles to really advocate for the clients, and even though it's huge amounts of money, justifying, well, they need this much money spent for their rehab.
Yeah, and that's one thing you do need in that world, is very good sort of clinical reasoning skills, because you will be challenged. You know, the other side will be putting across an opposite point of view, so you'll have to really stand up for saying why you think this person needs certain things.
And would you have to put the costs together yourself? Would you have to work out what it would cost for a care package, what it would cost for a particular piece of equipment that you're saying is essential?
Yeah, definitely.
And you said before that you
And
have
we
to
had
be
a lot
quite
of support.
resilient. You had a lot of
Yeah, we
support
had
with
a lot of
that.
support with that. Yeah, teams at the company would sort of help with that. So we'd have like somewhere we could go to work out, you know, if we're recommending this this care package, this is how you work out how much the costs would be, etc.
And would you ever have to attend court?
Well, in theory, yes. I never did. Quite often you would have to do like statements for the court, but the solicitors would sort of help you with that. But yeah, in theory, but very few cases actually go to court. So that was refreshing to know about. You were always living in fear, you know, that maybe I'll have to. But I think the vast majority of these cases settle out of court.
How did you feel after writing the first case report for the court?
Well, yeah, I always found it quite nerve-wracking, because you have to be so careful about every single thing that you write, because solicitors, you know, they're really into their detail, and they will pick up on any little detail. But it became much more, you know, we had solicitors would every single report that you wrote and before it went out. So you always felt confident that it was sort of quality checked before.
Yeah. I'm just turning my camera off, Jill, because the connection's gone a bit funny. So for any OTs that are interested in developing careers in case management or litigation work, what experience would you recommend that they get?
I would, if they were thinking of litigation roles, I would look at case management first. I mean, there is a growing role for case management assistants as well. And I think with the new IRCM role as well, I think there'll be more opportunities for, you know, to start off as a case management assistant and then sort of work your way up. Because it can be a very scary move for a lot of people, and doing the case management assistant role first, although it's less money, might be an easier transition. Because, you know, some people go into it and love it and have no problems, but quite a lot of people leave case management quite early on. It's just not for them, or for whatever reason.
And in terms of clinical experience, would you recommend, for instance, working in neurology first, or is it just important to get a really broad range of other experiences?
I think a broad range. I mean, it depends really, I suppose, if you're wanting to be a very specialist, just a brain injury case manager. But quite often you'll get clients with a range of injuries. You know, so I worked with people with spinal injury, amputee. So I think it's good to have a broad experience as well. But having that neurology experience is good. I think also knowing more about what's out there than the NHS offer is useful. I do remember meeting a speech and language, I think she was an expert, a therapy expert for children, and she was a speech and language, and she told me that she was always quite shocked with new speech and language therapists coming through, that they become almost brainwashed into giving the minimum service. So she used to struggle to sort of, as an expert, to say this person needs speech and language 3 times a week for however long, when the NHS are so used to sort of offering the absolute minimum.
Yeah, I imagine it could be hard to go into case management work and then go back into statutory services afterwards and have those limitations.
Yeah, because if you're not, routinely seeing the impact that having really good intensive therapy is having, then you're not going to be advocating for it, I suppose. So yeah, just knowing about everything that's out there for people that you can recommend, not necessarily just what's been offered currently by the NHS.
Do you think there's potentially a role for OTs having student placements with case managers?
I always tried to do that, but I think because of confidentiality and because of all the risks around litigation, I think that would be really difficult. Solicitors are get very touchy about anybody sort of, being involved, that, if information leaks out to the other side, it can be quite worrying. So I think there's a long way to go, I think, before we can be looking at having students in that arena.
Yeah, okay. And you've had a number of your roles have been outside of statutory services, so the case management and litigation, also working for a charity now. How well prepared do you think your university training prepared you for these sorts of roles?
Well, it seems a long time ago now, so it's hard to remember accurately, but my sort of initial gut feeling was it didn't really prepare me at all. But then, having said that, there weren't many roles available at that time. I think we had one lady came to speak to us when we were students, and she was a private OT, but I think she worked in paediatrics, and there was always a bit of a market for that. But we didn't learn anything about case management or jobs in charities, but I think that's because the jobs weren't there at the time. I do remember doing a little section on doing like a business plan, but I still would feel totally unprepared to go into like setting up my own practice or into a management role. I don't think we were prepared for that at all, really.
No, okay. And is there anything else you want to say to anyone else that's listening about the roles that you've had and any advice you'd give to OTs?
Just that it's an amazing profession in terms of the opportunities that are there. There's not many professions where you can do this variety of roles, I think. So yeah, I think if people are sort of thinking about, do I become a nurse or a social worker or an OT, or, I think OT is a great one to go for because it is so diverse.
Well, thanks ever so much for chatting. It's been really interesting to hear about your career.
Thank you.